It's Thursday, April 9th, and today I sit down with Tommy and Sam Marshall, and we discuss the SharePoint Intranet in a Box, changes that have been happening recently in Office 365, and sort of what our expectations are for the year. I hope you enjoy. Hello and welcome. We have our annual meeting with Sam Marshall. Sam, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, thank you, Danny. How are you guys?
Hanging in there, hanging in there. I think the whole world is hanging in there right now, right?
Yeah, holding your breath quite appropriately.
Absolutely. And I've got Tommy here with me as well. So our yearly get together to take a check across the pond and see how things are going. And I just love staying in touch with you. Love all the work that you're doing at Clearbox, and I just think it's great just to stay in touch and learn sort of what the trends are recently, because you do such a great job with your report, with the SharePoint Intranets in a Box report, and you're going to go. It's wonderful.
I'm British. We don't say things like that. We say, "Oh, it's fine."
We're American.
It's not bad. If you're really keen, you say it's not bad. But thank you for that. And it's lovely to talk to you guys. I think it's really nice to feel part of this community and stay connected across with the US as well.
Absolutely. So since my internet's going in and out here, I'm gonna hand it over to Tommy and mute myself, and just want to do a catch up of this year. Really sort of interested in hearing what trends are coming out. And then I'd love to hear about what is the latest version of the report, and just sort of catch us up on things like that. And that'd just be wonderful to hear from you. I think I'll kick it off here with a question, and Tommy, if you wanna, we can just take it from there. One of the things I find is every year we talk about, which is sort of how in the market, what are we seeing with people using native SharePoint, and especially with the new modern experience. And I think you do a great job at the beginning of the report, sort of like going through the process of thinking through which is right for your organization. And I think one of the trends that I've been seeing with working with a lot of customers has been them wanting to go native. It's them really taking a very close look at that. And especially we're working with communities that are in the, or companies that are in the tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of users, and really sort of seeing them as we can barely keep our arms around what's going on at Microsoft and the stuff that's coming, that they're really trying to focus in on the native experience. I was just wondering if you're seeing the same thing as well.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's quite a strong sentiment this year. Microsoft has been advancing at such a super fast pace, and I'm interested to see how keen Microsoft are to still kind of take on board feedback and keep moving the product forward in a way that I don't think was true even like 2 or 3 years ago. So now they're saying, yeah, we're getting this feedback, for example, about everybody wants hubs of hubs. So they said that they're working on that kind of thing, so you can have nested hubs. So that's very encouraging. And I think the implication of that has been that companies have said, well, even if we can't do it with standard SharePoint, we have faith that will come eventually. So we're more willing to do without, which for sure, in the report that we do, looking at SharePoint Intranet in a Box add-on products, is creating an interesting time for the many vendors that we've been looking at over the years. Yeah. I do think actually there's going to be a bit of a switch back next year with companies that try and do it natively and hit the bumpers and step back and say, well, is this the right strategy? I think it's absolutely right to experiment with it, but you might get so far and say, although we could do this with a little bit of custom code, it then becomes a little bit more custom code. And before you know it, you're back to where you were 5 years ago. Look, we built our own product, and now we've got to maintain this thing. And every release that Microsoft puts out is at risk of breaking our stuff. And we're back to being like in-house software developers, which as a company we never wanted to be.
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, I think it's that balance. It's interesting to see. Yeah, and there might be the pendulum might swing back and forth with folks, um, uh, through the years and seeing what they want to do. I think it's just good for us. I think we're still doing lots of what we're calling transformations. In essence, it's just a migration from different cloud products over to Office 365, where we've still been doing a lot of the Jive migrations. And in fact, since all this stuff has been happening in the world, a lot of people are reaching out to us. They're like finally saying like, we need to do this. We're many companies we've been talking to like 5+ years, and every year they sort of look at it. Now all of a sudden they're like, let's do this now. So it's.
Do you think Jive is going to be like Lotus Notes, that every time you think it's dead, and you find a new nest of Lotus Notes, and they all spawn out to you? Right, let's dump it down again and replace it with SharePoint.
There's a bit of like when we meet up with them, it's a little bit like group therapy, where they come in and they're like, okay, how long have you been hating Jive? Like, has it ruined your marriage yet? It's just a little bit, and there's some vitriol that people come into the conversations with, where they're upset, and they it's been a really bad experience for many years, and it's almost like this abuse thing. Like, you guys really want another year of this? Are you sure you want this? Are you ready to go make the move? So that's been interesting to see, and I think that we often want to bring up the conversation about the experience that they have in Jive now, and what the experience is going to be as they move over to Office 365 and Microsoft 365, and we want that to be a positive change. We don't want this to be all of a sudden, Jive does certain things very well, and then once you make the move, we want this to continue to be well adopted and something that they love to use. And it's, as you know, with Office 365, there are some things that you need to do to improve the experience. So that's one of the things that we've been focusing on. So
yeah.
So,
and I still think that the social element of Office 365 is quite fragmented and relatively immature. And I can imagine that a lot of companies that were early adopters of Jive and really believe that social intranet story will miss that, because they probably have built up some very active communities. And when you move them over into Yammer or Teams, and you have a dilemma there in itself.
Yes,
you're going to miss some of the richness of the experience.
Yep. Some of the more recent opportunities that we've been seeing there, since it's been many years since it seems like Microsoft has really invested in Yammer, and they've recently started doing some new things with it. So with the last the set of opportunities that we're seeing, there seems to be a little bit more interest in that, which is good to see. But we continue to have the problem, which everybody has, which is moving content into Yammer. It's difficult for us to do, and so you end up coming up with some alternate solutions. And then the conversations, we've been doing this thing called content rationalization, which is like, what's the value of the content that you have in this other system, and rationalizing, investing the money to move it from one place over to the next place. And what do you lose? Because there's a lot of companies that might just there's different strategies that you can take. Some people just are like, tell your end users, we're going to be off on this date, and you have to get all your stuff off by then, to trying to move everything over, which we don't recommend, to taking a sort of a hybrid approach, which is, hey, this is a good time to clean up the closet and then make the move. So we've been having lots of those types of conversations with people as well. So Tommy, I've been talking too much. Go ahead, Sam.
Well, no, it's a really interesting point, isn't it, about what are your social communities? Because there's an argument that goes, well, the conversations, that the actual social stuff should be transitory. And even to the extent that someone says, well, someone asked a question last year and they got some loads of answers, but are we sure that they'd still get the same answers this year? Or maybe the advice that people would give us moved on. So it's maybe dangerous even to archive it because the answer was given us of the moment. And I always think if you've got a really good community, it should be producing resources outside of the conversations.
Yes.
In the same way that if you've got a problem with your PC and you search the web and you get to one of these end user help sites where there's 300 answers and someone finally says, yeah, answer 297 was the right one, we'll pin it to the top. You don't need all the other stuff. What you would really like is a document that extracts an answer and puts into something which is the reference that says, this is the recommended answer. And that's probably the only bit you need.
Yep. Yeah, it's interesting you say that, Sam. We recently presented on the PNP monthly call or weekly call, where we did a Q&A web part for one of our customers because they were looking at the Q&A in Jive, that is the one thing they couldn't leave behind. And so we created that Q&A web part and open sourced it because it was the only reason for them to go to Yammer. And they said, we don't want to launch another platform just for that question and answer. So that's something that I think it would be great if it got brought in as a capability in SharePoint. And we know SharePoint has just been terrible about discussions and rich discussion content and making that modern. There is no answer, no clear-cut answer for that. And so it's interesting with the community is saying these things are missing. You start seeing that come up as P&P, and then ideally they take that and productize it into platform. So people are not stuck with, well, I don't have a rich discussion capability.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I still notice in the SharePoint Intranet in a Box products is that they are filling in a lot of the gaps. And Microsoft is really good at doing the kind of requirements checklist from a sales point of view and saying, yeah, don't worry, if you get Office 365, you got publishing, you got news, you've got discussions, you've got video, which is all true, but it's not as if it was all designed as one integrated product. For example, if you comment on Stream, that comment doesn't live anywhere outside of Stream. It's not like I can then go to Danny's profile and see that he's commented on Stream and also responded to an executive blog post and see that activity. And sometimes I think that Microsoft is more interested in that checklist than in doing a lot of the groundwork to make some of these feature sets complete. And that's where the in-the-box products still come into my mind. That it is almost like what you're buying into is the vendors have anticipated some of the gaps and the awkward bits that are not immediately apparent, but what you would start to see maybe 6 months into an implementation of trying to do things just with standard SharePoint.
It's interesting you made the comment around social, where that still seems to be one of the gaps and one of the kind of little nooks that people can come in and say, well, you still don't have a good comprehensive social experience. And Danny and I were just looking at Teams the other day. We were so excited to see tags come in. And I don't know if you've played with the tags that are in Teams, but it's really like a distribution list. It's not,
isn't it? Yeah.
It's not
so you can target your alerts to people, but it's not tags like you get in Slack, if we can mention Slack.
Yeah, it's like a Slack
or indeed in Yammer. Yammer has quite nice hashtags now, and you can follow a hashtag as a topic interest.
Yep. Right. Yeah. And so that common, concept of a tag, that it's there in Yammer, but it's not in Teams, it's not in SharePoint, having that holistic experience that you've got cross-cutting, standard concepts that can be surfaced across the platform. And that, I think, creates that opportunity where you still see third party to say, well, we can kind of glue it together for you. We can have these concepts to be similar across your user experience. What have you seen with Teams in terms of how has that changed the landscape for the intranet in a box type companies? Because Teams really seems to be something that has got quite a bit of traction, and I think a lot of success with conversations around content that is, for us, it's increased our productivity quite a bit to be able to have that context of a conversation that lives with the document. And so when our intranet in the boxes, I'm seeing some of them, they're putting a lot of emphasis on how they cooperate and enhance the Teams experience.
Yeah, so I mean, Teams is getting 90% of the love at the moment, and it's, even through March, I think it's more than doubled its daily user base just in 1 month because of the sudden interest in working at a distance, which I think is great, and I hope that people learn good habits from it and take them forward. For the in-a-box vendors, they're seeing opportunities there because Teams is a relatively new product, and there's kind of 3 trends. So one is, how do you take an intranet and put it into Teams? Because the appeal is that you got the Teams application up on the desktop. So wouldn't it be great if on the left-hand rail you saw an icon for your company intranet, and then you could see, for example, news which is published in a more visually appealing way than just doing an announcement as a post within a normal Teams stream.
Right.
The other one is, how do we take Teams and put that into your intranet? Because the other big challenge with Teams is that the navigation is really pretty lean. So yeah, you got your long list of teams that you're part of, but if you want to go to an application, or indeed if you only part-time go to a team because you're perhaps a stakeholder in it and once a month you want to be part of a steering group, but you really don't want to fill up your left-hand list, the discovery part of Teams is pretty hard. And then the third one is more around the governance of Teams. So we've all got the grey hairs from SharePoint sprawl and team sites and terrible naming conventions and terrible security. So we know what good information hygiene looks like. Teams has kind of gone back to that free-for-all of you click a button and suddenly you've got a whole set of features deployed, because you got the group, you got the SharePoint team site, you got the Teams interface, you got our mailbox that nobody really knows about.
Yeah, it's almost like they mean to do this, Sam. It's almost like they mean to do this.
Surely not. It's just like it's like that brilliant scientist that creates a monster inadvertently whilst trying to invent a carrot that will feed the world. Look, but the governance side, a lot of companies, although they want some interaction, they don't want to let that whole genie out of the bottle. So things like a naming convention, or just saying, you created a team called Phoenix Project, but did you know there's already 5 teams called Project Phoenix 1 to Project Phoenix 5? Are you sure you want to do this? And that, I think, is a great contribution to getting your arms around not just the Teams element, but thinking again about the whole digital workplace experience that you create within Teams. So that's all good. So far, I haven't seen any fantastic examples of bringing an intranet into Teams. It feels a little bit like you're just using Teams as a web browser on an intranet, which is still pretty much a standard web-based paradigm. My dream is that one day we'll have more or less the ability to put web parts into a Teams space and kind of mix up a little bit more the conversation element and the curated publishing element.
Yep.
I don't develop software, so I can dream big and have no comeback.
What's I find kind of interesting, and sort of back to one of the benefits should be that if you're using sort of Microsoft and their product suite should be the integration between, you were mentioning this earlier before, should be that that there is integration between the different services it provides. It just seems strange where like it seems like the real opportunity for Microsoft is the integration between all these different products, yet they still feel like they're sort of each group is developing their own thing. And that's a challenge because they're a large organization. They do have their own development groups. They're sort of their own thing that they're trying to do. And I do think Microsoft is getting better at it, but I think that's that is probably one of the things that internally, is their challenge, is to get this whole thing, is to get the different services. You were mentioning like earlier about stream, and if I leave a comment, then it's nowhere else, it's not visible anywhere else. That's the challenge to Microsoft, is the integrated experience, which should be the reason why, it's typically the reason why you go with a one vendor solution, is that it's integrated. That's typically why you do it. It's not we know it's not the case right now with Microsoft, but it's like that could be their advantage, and right now it's not, as we know, once you see the features, but then once you dig into it, you see that they're missing something with the integration piece. So
I agree. If you major on innovation, then the integration has to come later, because if every time you try and move forward, you've got to align with 5 other things, and you're going to get more turgid. Sure. And I think we should acknowledge that Microsoft do a fantastic job in integrating what they do with the things like Word and Excel and PowerPoint. I'm really impressed sometimes when they announce a feature and they say, and now you can also do this within like the web version of PowerPoint. Yeah. So some of the things are so much better than they were 3 or 4 years ago, but we're so swamped with announcements. I lose track sometimes of, gosh, is that only come in the last 3 weeks? Because it feels like I've been using it for ages already. Mm-hmm. So there's some very good stuff on the personal productivity end.
And this, I've probably mentioned this in past years, the reason why people, we were talking about Jive earlier, the reason why people originally went with Jive was because they outpaced Microsoft with the 3-year product cycles. Now the reverse is the case. Now Microsoft Jive's not putting any updates out, and they're outpacing them. So the original original intent, which was to stay innovative, has now switched. I mean, so it's fascinating to see how that happened over a course of time. And a lot of our customers, I think right now, instead of them just saying the cost, I don't need to pay for 2 things that do essentially the same thing, or they look like they do the same thing. Now it's an innovation problem. Now there are things that we don't have that we want, and it's stopping us from innovating. So it's interesting to see that come along too.
I mean, my biggest fear with Teams is that because people see it as the place to be, they're starting to stuff in everything they can think of. And a lot of people saying, well, should it be your digital workplace launchpad? Should you do your expenses through it? Should it be the place where you see all your calendars and so on? And the risk is that it loses some of its current appeal, which is that it's relatively simple. So the affordance of what do I go to Teams for is, well, I collaborate with my team, I have conversations, I can have video, I can see documents. Mm-hmm. And the more you load extra stuff into it, actually, the less clear it becomes to your average user about what Teams is for and why I'm meant to be in there, or indeed its learnability becomes harder as well. So I think it would be good actually if Microsoft pulled back a little bit at some point and didn't try and make Teams a route into all things. There was an interesting study from Swoop Analytics, because they do like an analytics plugin for Teams, and 70% of all the traffic was chat. Ad hoc chat groups, which surprised me because I do everything in channels. To me, that makes sense as like structured collaboration. But most organizations have deployed Teams and said, here's WhatsApp for the enterprise. Off you go. They're probably just sharing puppy pictures and really ignoring a lot of that functionality, which I think is a really missed opportunity if that's the case.
Yeah. I have to ask this question every year since Microsoft, like this past year, bought Mover. They bought a migration tool. So that was a product that was out there. Any thoughts on, and you can always plead, any thoughts on whether Microsoft's going to buy one of these and then the rest of them go away, or you can say no thoughts, but I'm fascinated. I'm sort of interested to see whether that's going to happen.
Are they going to buy a migration tool, are you asking?
No, one of these SharePoint intranets in a box, sort of like
okay.
Yeah.
No, I think if they're going to do it, they would have done it 2 years ago.
They would have done it.
Okay. They're just going their own route, and I can see them buying like a Teams governance tool and working some of that in. I'd love it if they bought an analytics tool that was better than the Office 365 analytics. It basically says, look at how many licenses you've got, and look who's using their licenses, and buy more licenses, but doesn't really give you any insights into how you might want to change your engagement tactics as a communicator, for example.
Right.
But yeah, I think the in-a-box market, it's going to become more specialist, and it's great that people have different ways of solving the problems they have that aren't solved by native SharePoint. But I think we've hit peak in-a-box diversity at the moment, and we're seeing, for example, some companies consolidating. So when we first did the report back in 2016, Hadron was one of the original products. I think they even claimed to be one of the first Internet in a Box products, and they've now become Wisdom partners. So even they've had to rethink about the market potential now. They were never a massive player, but in the US, Catapult, for example, have become Valo partners, and they, I think, did have infused quite a nice product, but they've moved into if you can't beat them, join them tactic.
Mm-hmm. Any of these do you think any of these companies are going to verticalize, like try to come up with, instead of trying to go into certain industries? Have you seen any of that at all?
There's already a few of those. So like Hadron specializes in medical, and in our National Health Service, they really understand that business. There's a couple that are really majoring on the law side of things, because like the e-discovery angle isn't something that most of the standard in-a-box products would cover. And probably, yes, that is a good strategy, because if you really know an industry, you'll say, there's a dozen things that Microsoft just doesn't seem to understand about this industry that we do. So let's focus on developing tools for them.
Yep, that makes sense.
So Sam, how does the shape of your report changing for this year? What do you see that's becoming different, and things that you want to highlight that you think are relevant to the market of Internet in a Box?
Yes, so since we last spoke, the exciting change for us is that we've moved to a quarterly update model.
Mm-hmm.
So we found with an annual update, there'd just been so many of the changes happened, not just to the products, but also to SharePoint itself. So now we do a quarterly update. We just released version 5.1 last month. We're heavily into version 5.2. And it means that whenever a product has a major update, we'll review it then, rather than making them sit 6 months or so before we come back to them. So that's one thing that we're changing. I'm sure the scenarios will evolve to focus more on like the team's angle and the team's integration. And what I also think is a very interesting move by, for example, Beezy and Akimina, is integration with non-Office 365 services. So really trying to create an employee experience where you don't care what's happening behind the scenes in terms of booking your travel or updating your HR profile, because they are acting as effective middleware.
Yeah.
But we've got two other products in the pipeline as well. So we're going wider.
Let's hear them.
We see loads of exciting changes in what we're calling the employee app space. So like Social Chorus, Dynamic Signal, Staff Base that started off as mobile, were first-line worker-oriented tools. So we're going to be doing a similar report around that. And for years, people have said, well, if we're not in the Microsoft world, what are our alternatives? So the independent internet space will be doing another report around, for example, Igloo, Interact, Lumaps, and all the other great products that deserve some limelight too.
Good for you. That's great.
Yeah. One of the things that, one of the narratives that's happening is to say, well, if SharePoint is becoming more like the reference content repository, but we don't consume it from within a SharePoint interface, we consume it within Teams, then do we actually have to use, for example, hub sites or communication sites to access the news and stuff? Or maybe we can have a standalone application that pulls the news from SharePoint and understands the document in Office 365, but then has its own presentation layer, which maybe gives us more flexibility around the look and feel and the branding and more integration options than we've had before.
Excellent. We'll wrap it up. Any other any thoughts to wrap this conversation up at all, or?
So, you know, we're in changing times. There's this massive uptick in Teams adoption, and I guess if you're listening to this, just really think about the mid to long term as well. And one of the things that I'm really kind of pushing this year to talk about digital literacy for your employees. It's not just about giving them Teams. Think about how you get them doing more than it being a corporate WhatsApp, and understanding, for example, mute and notifications and how it can actually enhance the life rather than just be one more thing to look at.
That's great. That's great. Well, we'll see you in a year. Maybe
It'd be my pleasure.
I love. Thank you so much for meeting up, and yeah, if you're ever here in the States, or if we're over there, I'd love to meet up in person. Would be good, but that won't be happening.
That'd be great.
Soon.
I was going to say,
not, but
if ever that invitation sounded less likely, and when we do, I'll buy you a beer. Yeah,
I'll buy you.
Hey, but it sounds like you guys are doing great work. It sounds like you've been really successful.
Thanks.
So that's fantastic to hear. Keep it up. And one day.
Thanks. Yep. Thank you so much. And thanks for staying in touch. Thanks everybody for listening, and have a wonderful day. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Work Together Better podcast. We're available on SoundCloud, iTunes, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you're looking for a partner to help you craft a modern digital workplace on the Microsoft Cloud, please come by and see us at ThreeWill.com. That's the number 3 spelled out, WILL.com. Thank you and have a great day.